Get up. I'm bent, but I'm sore.
Okay.
Well, I could have said it might be taken differently.
All right. Can you hear me all right? Am I? How about now? I don't know. This thing's.
Just tip your head up to that microphone.
Just do this the whole time? Yeah. You look kind of funny as I fall down. Well, Janine's right there, so a little higher maybe. You think being the son of a preacher and an English teacher, I could do louder? I apologize for running late, and I apologize for last week. It was funny. Elizabeth just was a little under the weather, and so I said, "Okay, I'll teach your class." I ended up teaching the 3rd through 5th graders last week, which, believe me, is actually a lot harder than doing this, because those kids check you. They always say, check, make sure what I'm saying is true. They will. They'll go. But we got to watch a movie about Nehemiah, so that was fun. So you can imagine I was doing a preparation for this class, and then had to do like a complete biblical 180 and start studying about Ezra and Nehemiah. That was nearly sprained my ankle because I had to slap him on the brake so hard. Pat is off flying all month, so he asked me to finish the year, and then he'll be back. So I had to figure out, what could I do that's just relatively short, but still impactful. I mean, I'm just not going to sit up here and tap dance for 3 weeks. So honestly, given everything going on in the world and how busy it is, and turns out this week Elizabeth had COVID, so that's the reason why I'm late this morning. I was making sure she was squared away, and my son's with her, and she's better. She's just at that point where she just wore out, coughing a little bit, but everything's better. So, prayers are requested, but she's, I think better. So I'm running a little late this morning, but just given the, how the world's been, how just every time you look at the news, it's just something bad. Like yesterday, the stuff in Kentucky, and I mean, that tornado apparently stood on the ground for like over 200 miles, just tearing up, and I've lost track with how many folks were killed, and things were changing. You just see, I don't know, it just seems like every time we look around, it's something bad. And so I have found, me personally, when it just gets bad like that, I tend to run home to James, the book of James. And I like the book of James because it speaks to me practically. It's a good book that just basically, it doesn't use a lot of flowery language. Luke tends to get a little bit doctory, which I can handle, but I don't always want because it means I have to think. Paul can get very deep about the concepts he's conveying, and that's also good stuff. It's just James is basically sitting across the table, drinking coffee, and somebody who's been there, done that, giving you advice. And that's what I like about James. The book of James, here's some quotes about the book of James, and they're just random quotes that I found, and there's more Jewish book in the New Testament than the Epistle of James, not even including Matthew, Hebrews, and the Revelation letter. So, I mean, its target audience was the Jewish people. And the book itself is, I think, like somebody sitting around a campfire talking and kind of going through, problems. The if we eliminate 2 or 3 passages containing references to Christ, the whole book might find its place just as properly in the Old Testament as that in the New Testament, as far as its substance of doctrine and in the contents. That could not be said of any other book in the New Testament. It's a little bit of a history book, but it, obviously since it refers to Jesus, it's a New Testament book. And then it was written about 230 A.D., they think. Or actually, it was pretty much canonized in 2030. And it seems to be written about the time as 1 Peter, which was about 65, 67 A.D., because the language is very similar. So, if it was written about then, it probably is designed to reflect the religious conditions between Jews and Christians. In some instances, they were really closely identified with each other until persecution started. And that tended to divide the two groups. And that's where you get the, early Christians only had the teaching of Christ, and they would, they were meeting in the synagogues, they were meeting in the temple. That's where you could meet because of the, that's just where people met for such things. But they only preached Christ to Jews at first. And of course, you had Jews that were trying to obey the old law and the teaching of Jesus, and a little bit of conflict came up. And so that's why you see, I think, this book. But the thing that held them together was like a moral law of, God's people needed to be guided. So the old was really a shadow of the new. So obviously it was expected to be many similarities. So that's why, they think the book of James would fit in well in the Old Testament just as well as the New. James, the writer of the book, has always been discussed. There's 4 Jameses we hear about in the New Testament. But they think the author is actually the brother of Jesus, James. James was one of 4 older brothers other brothers of Jesus. Actually found the names of all the brothers: James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. They were all sons of Joseph and Mary, brothers of Jesus. And James was probably the oldest, so that means he was probably child number 2 for that family, and Joseph and Mary's first child. They would have all been born and brought up in Nazareth, as it mentions in Matthew. We know nothing about James up until the time of Jesus' public ministry. The indications are given in John's gospel that his brothers did not really believe him to be the Messiah. That's in John. So they were, skeptical because it's like, oh, come on, that's, my brother can't be from heaven, right? I would feel the exact same way about my baby brother. It's like, really? Come on. He just wants attention. But as you see later, and it's funny because even at Jesus' death, he committed his mother to the care of John, the apostle, if you remember, not his brothers. He said, John, take care of mom. And he didn't call out any of his brothers and say that. So, I find that interesting that, even then. But apparently James becomes active and does believe because he begins endorsing Paul's work among the Gentiles. Now, granted, he was obviously more concerned about Jews because that was, his folks, and he was much more interested in that. But the writer of this letter is referred to as James the Just because of his devotion. He drank no wine, ate no animal food, and no razor touched his head. He spent much time in prayer at the temple and had a strong emphasis upon obedience to God. Josephus, the historian, records his death as a martyr in AD 62. So his remarks are mentioned by Hegesippus, a Christian Jew, in 160 AD, and later by Eusebius, another historian. So it is widely considered that James was written by Jesus' brother. Now, it was written to, in chapter 1, verse 1. If we want to open up to James, we'll be in the text for here in a little bit. It was written to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. So it could be either the Jews that have been scattered throughout the civilized world, or to Jewish Christians everywhere that we're not sure of. So the latter, we believe it's mostly to the latter, because what you see is there are several instances of Abraham being spoken of as being our father. The synagogue was spoken of as a place of worship. They talk about a common faith and how they need to wait patiently for the coming of the Lord. So he's talking to just Jewish Christians everywhere. And that's kind of the crux of it. We'll get my Bible open too while we're doing this. So, again, we talked about how this book is very practical. So I think today, in the few minutes we have left, and again I apologize for being late, and we'll continue this, is there are several attitudes that James talks about, and also several things that he talks a lot about faith. And so we're going to be in James. We're just going to start in chapter 1, and we're going to read the first 8 verses. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all, without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Okay, I'm going to do a second reading. Let's read chapter 2, and we'll start in verse 14. And we'll finish the chapter. And of course, this one's one of those that usually, if it's going to be highlighted, this is one that's highlighted. So, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there's one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled. It says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. So the emphasis on faith is found all over the Bible. Remember the Israelites that came out of Egypt were not allowed to go into the house of promised land because of their unbelief. In Hebrews, talks about that. Hebrews also says an evil heart of unbelief and departing from the living God is, you don't want to get caught up in that. So in Hebrews, Hebrews is kind of parallel to this as far as faith goes. Where it talks about, without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And even Jesus at one point yelled at his apostles saying, "Oh, ye of little faith," right? So, let's talk about the first reading, the one in chapter 1. And this is where James gets into dealing with doubt. Now, the statement, "Count it all joy when you fall into various trials," that's what you call a paradox. It doesn't seem to make sense on the surface. It needs further clarification. The usual human experience when trouble happens is to question, doubt, and be uncertain about why did it happen to me? What caused this to happen? God knows this and immediately tries to help us see the need to deal with our doubt. And then what we're trying to do is develop wisdom to understand what is going on, even for something that we don't fully understand at that time. And that's where faith comes in. So,
we sometimes, when we were young, we read that, consider it pure joy. I think, well, somebody has trials and tribulations that they're going to be jumping around and clapping their hands. To me, that's pure joy. But that's not what it's saying here. I've never seen anybody that's fallen into, problems in their lives, and that's the way they meet each day. Now, down in their heart is where it all is.
You're right. It's not an outward expression of joy. And I think that's exactly what James is saying, is there's going to be good come out of this. Be happy about that. Because, yes, you're undergoing some trials, and yes, it's not a very good day, but there is a rainbow at the end of it. There is a light at the end of that tunnel, and it's not a train. It's there'll be good come out of this. If anything, you're stronger and you're better for it as a Christian, as a human being, and that's good, because I don't know about you, but so I always yell at myself or I yell at anyone else, but doubt is doubt creeps in. Doubt is very insidious. It's one of those things where you don't even know you're doubting until you look up and you think, why me? What did I do wrong? What do I need to do? I don't think I know how to handle this. Doubt in medicine is a very dangerous thing, because you have to trust what you're doing, or the patient won't believe it, and then they believe that there's a mental component to, if you don't believe the therapy, they're not going to believe it either, and it's not going to work. There's also sometimes where I've honestly been guilty of that several times this week, where I'm chasing a number. I'm chasing symptoms, instead of just dealing with my patient, who happens to also be my wife. So it's hard to be, completely objective, because there's emotional attachment. If it was just some stranger, it's so much easier just to go, well, let's do this, because that's what you know to do. When it's somebody you're going, should we do that? Doubt. And that's where, that's why this really spoke to me this week about, dealing with doubt. And one of the remedies for doubting is to actually try to seek wisdom from God. And the best way to, what's the best way to get wisdom from God? Ask for it. Ask for it. Read the words from that He has provided us. And it's so easy to forget. I don't know how many times I've just, there's actually a song. What is it? Ere you left your room this morning, did you think to pray? The chorus is even, oh, how praying helps the weary, and prayer can change the night to day. But it's a very simple thing, and it's there for us. And that's what, James is basically saying is, it's there for you, but unfortunately, we forget to ask.
It's there for you, and it works.
And it works. And again, it's there for us, and it's free. There's no copay. There's no insurance papers to be filed. There's no phone numbers to call. It's basically God saying it's a 1-800 number. Use it. And yet here we go, not doing it. And here's a statement I read somewhere, and I thought, wow, this is kind of true. A person can be a walking Bible and not be wise. How true is that? I mean, how many scholars, and of course, Jesus ran into this all the time, of, the Pharisees, Sadducees, especially the Pharisees, they knew the law backwards and forwards. That was their job. That was their entire life, was knowing all of those commandments, all of those laws. But were they wise?
Philip, it's like knowledge without understanding.
It's one of the biggest complaints old geezers like me in the medical field have about the new kids coming out, is they can spew therapeutics, but if you ask them a very simple question about, well, how's the patient? They look at you blank. The common sense, us old geezers are like, they didn't teach you common sense? They just jammed your head full of knowledge and then just said, go? And that's unfortunately, you see that a lot, especially those of us that are getting into the age of get off my lawn kind of healthcare. But you see that where, people are so worried about knowing the law and knowing the word and knowing what to do or what they should do. They're not necessarily doing it. And they don't understand right. It's the understanding. It's like, one of the things I try to teach when I teach college kids is, especially when we talk about management and, what you need to do when you're leading people is, I always tell them you need to explain the why. Because if they don't know the why, they're not going to buy into whatever you're asking them to do. And so God is trying to tell us the why. But we have to be open to it and receptive to it.
Well, just like with, with the spies.
Rahab.
Rahab.
Yeah.
I was trying to say Rachel, but I knew that wasn't
Right?
Rahab. All right. She was considered righteous, correct? Because that's what the Bible says.
Yeah, that's what he says here.
But then with our standards, what was her profession?
Yeah, not so much. Yeah.
We would hold her to, well, you're not righteous yet because you haven't, whatever. And so sometimes I think, the old saying that God looks at the heart is a lot to do with how we're going to be judged. The inner man. What's our real motive?
And
And when you look at Rahab, and apparently she went with the children of Israel after that, and that's the last we hear of her.
What was her one request when she said, "I'll hide you"? What was her one request? Just spare my family.
Yeah.
Don't kill me. Don't kill our family. But she had the word we keep coming back to. She had faith. She was convinced that what was going to happen and she was right. Yes, ma'am.
You were talking about the knowledge. What is the old saying? Walk the talk. Because if we don't live it, doesn't matter how much we know.
There's a gospel song I used to hear. It was like one of those old Southern gospel songs. It was, see if I can get this right, because it's very complicated. Of course, when you're singing, it's even harder. Your talk talks, your walk walks, but your walk talks better than your talk talks. Which is it's a great chorus, and it's true. But you know, again, what does James talk about? Show me your works. I'll show you my faith. How? By what I'm doing. And so what that tells me, and again, this always, when I found out when I study for teaching this class, by the time I'm done after about an hour, I feel like I've just had a biblical whipping. So the gist I got out of this is we're not allowed to stand on the sidelines. I've got to get out there and show my faith by my works. Now, I don't quite know what that means some days. Is it just being nice to people? Is it not yelling at somebody in traffic? Is it a gentle touch? Is it telling somebody about Jesus? I don't know sometimes.
It's the example that others
Yeah.
see.
I think one of the greatest things I was ever said to me, he's a good friend of mine, still is. We were college roommates, I've known him since the 6th grade. He lives in Fredericksburg, and he came to Christ while we were after college. And I know it helped that the girl he met and ended up marrying, and they have a great family now, was a Christian, Church of Christ member that we knew. So it was a lot of things came together. But what he said was, one thing I just noticed was how you and your brother, my little brother, lived. And that made me think, that's something I think I'd like to be. That was the neatest thing anyone's ever said to me. That we didn't even know that just by being ourselves and basically things we didn't do in college was actually influencing. And so, again, that's what James is trying to get across is, if you're a good, godly person, then somebody's going to notice. So it may be a nurse at my hospital, or a patient's family, or the lady at the front desk that brings people in, one of the physicians, one of the people that I will bump into when I run over to pick up food at the barbecue place. I don't know. But it says it right here in black and white, or in my case, it's
the little things that you do that are more important as the big things. Usually the big thing that somebody does, look what I'm doing. And you say you and your brother, you didn't know you were actually, but somebody was watching, somebody was taking notes, and it helped somebody.
And it did. And to this day, he's still faithful. And, I love him as much as I did then. I mean, he's always been a brother to me. So it's not really it's funny, it didn't really change it. It just made it stronger, our connection, because now we have even more in common than just knowing him since we were, 12 years old. But it's also, the flip side of that's kind of scary to me. I could negatively influence somebody real easy. Where I react in traffic inappropriately, or I get frustrated and yell at a physician. I've done that, and I felt bad about it later. We got into a shouting match, and it's funny because now we're best friends. But I can also, I don't know can you unshow your faith? With your negative works, I mean, or I guess in this case, you're showing your faith, it's just you're showing it's not very good because of your works. So it's a two-way street, James is saying be good, but it's implied that you can mess this up too. Or at least that's how I read it. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Philip, just a comment, one of the things that I've seen people struggle with in the church, being raised in the church, is the term enough. How much is enough? And for some reason, I was raised with the concept that you got to have enough. And we're not gonna be perfect. We need to be Christ-like. And to compare what I do to somebody else is not, I don't believe that's what God wants me to do. I can't be Philip and Philip can't be me.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to do what's in my life and not try to be Philip Johnson.
And there's no way I could pull off a Joe Van or Charles Williams or Pappy or anyone else. I can barely take care of myself. And you know, some days I do better than others. I think we can all say that. You know, the good news is I don't know. It seems like, you know, what's the statement from Gone with the Wind? That tomorrow's another day.
Well, you know, when you mess up, that gives you an opportunity to apologize. And that's going to impact that person even more than seeing you forever being a good guy. If you go back after you've messed up and say, I'm sorry, that's going to mean more to them than the other.
That's true. You're right. Going back to that person and saying, listen, I feel bad. I kind of messed up. And you're right. That's actually what kind of happened with this anesthesiologist that I got into a shouting match with. We both went to each other and went, okay, that was really stupid what we just did. And we apologized. And next thing you know, we interacted. The next time we interacted was cordial. And then it was friendlier and friendlier. And now we literally text each other once a week. And we don't even work together anymore. It's just one of those things where you're allowed to show your character. And that's what James is getting to. Because how is somebody going to believe in God and Jesus? Because, you know, you think about it, it's a really difficult thing to get your arms around. Somebody who is all-knowing, everywhere, made everything, has time for you and everybody else at the same time, and finds even the simplest request, like you know, me saying, "Hey, can you get me to Lubbock safely and back?" You know, he says, "Okay," but yet he's taking care of everything. That's hard to get your arm. That's where faith comes in, because I come from a line of work where it's all evidence-based. Theories are only theories until proven. If you can touch it, even better. If you can feel it, if you can hear it, if you can objective data versus subjective. Well, we don't have that luxury. Jesus isn't walking around like he was all those years ago. Bushes don't talk to us. Now, I do think deep down sometimes God is there in subtle ways, you know, just with coincidences and maybe something somebody said or a chance meeting, or sometimes you wonder if God didn't have a little hand in that. But I know it still requires faith to believe in something that, well, what's the definition we hear in the New Testament? It's the belief in something hoped for but not seen. We can't see it. We can't touch it. No one's ever come and said, "Hi, I'm Jesus, and you're correct." So it requires faith. So if we have to do that, and we do a pretty good job, how would you get somebody who doesn't have faith to become like that? I mean, if I just tell them if I just walk up and say, this is the way it is, how effective is that? Not always.
So Paul in 1 Corinthians 9:19, though I am free, I belong to no man, no one. I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. And that should be our attitude also, is show our faith, do what we know we need to do, hopes of winning as many as we can to Christ.
And I think that's what James is getting at too, where he's basically saying, here's James going, okay, here's my advice. If you want to win people over and teach them about faith and get them to have a faith, they've got to see it. They've got to see it from you. They've got to see it in your actions. And so really, since I know I certainly don't walk around all day consciously thinking about, okay, how can I show my best self to garner the faith? I probably should, but the old definition of character keeps into my mind. It's how you behave when nobody's watching. And I think that's where we are with this, is you just assume somebody's watching with your works.
I think if we stop and think about it, there's been someone in our life, or a lot of people in our life, who've made that impression on us. Not necessarily mom and dad. Mom and dad were always, good Christian examples, but sometimes it was someone else that maybe said the same thing as mom and dad, and it kind of went on. So it's like, I remember praying that the boys would have people around them that they could look up to and learn from, and they could be an example for. And I can see people through, as you said, there are things in our life but I can just see people that in my life, or circumstances.
I think of it as like monuments. Like if you remember the children of Israel when they crossed the Jordan, God said, put a monument here to remind your kids of what happened. I think we have monuments in our lives and our children's lives, and sometimes you don't realize it until you've already passed it, going, oh, that was a pretty sentinel moment. And I think you're 100% correct. What I've always heard them referred to as heroes of the faith. Matter of fact, I think there's another song. I always go back to music, but the chorus is heroes of the faith, soldiers of the cross, speaking about that grand old story of Jesus saving the lost. It's just people that were good Christian examples. And you're right, often it wasn't your parents, because my dad was a minister for 40-something years, and there were some days when I thought, biggest idiot on the planet. Yes?
That brings up a subject that probably I shouldn't discuss, but it's very, very personal, and it's your dad. Your dad was one of the best ministers. I'm bragging until I met my husband, who was a minister. And they were dear, dear friends at Abilene Christian. And when I was a teenager at Abilene Christian, your dad introduced me to my husband, who was a minister in Marble Falls.
So you're saying I need to apologize for that?
No.
Okay.
What I want to say is your dad had such an impact on my life, and then never did I believe I would marry a minister. And I did. And I'm most appreciative to you and your family as I grew up, because I went to the mission field as a teenager.
You did.
I would have never done it without
What?
somebody influencing, and I'm not bragging, it's just the influence of somebody else, especially a minister. You know I'm going to take up for a minister.
Yeah, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I think he was such a good minister, it drove me straight to medicine, because there's no way I knew I could top that or improve on it. So, again, I know he influenced lots of people and they tell me, and that always makes my heart warm, because that's what he wanted to do. That's why he got into it. All right, our chariot's turned into a pumpkin, so. Oh, I suppose. So we'll be in James again next week, and we'll talk about trials and tribulations, and there's ways to get out of that. Thank you all.